Can you guys mute?
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. This is my informative speech, and here is my audience. And for my informative speech, I'd like to go over how corporations, through their greedy practices, are ruining the gaming industry. Business is all about just making a profit, selling a product to the consumer and making money. Video games are an art form where people are allowed to express their creativity. But when you combine the two, it unfortunately leads to video games suffering in quality. I have always been a fan of video games since I was a child. My brother and friends introduced me, and over time, it led me down to a rabbit hole where it wasn't just playing the games. It was about how they're made, what goes behind them, and the people who worked on them got me so interested. And it's something where I don't think I will ever give up on or will get sick of. But my passion has been dying recently due to the fact corporations have been getting more greedy. And because of corporate greed, it has been leading to the gaming industry being anti-consumer and leading down to the decline of video games overall. So for my speech, I'd like to go over what type of gaming era we lived in the past, how greed has been ruining the gaming industry, and what hope we can see in the modern day. So now I'd like to look at what gaming was like before in the early 90s, 2000s, and 2010s. Gaming was an art to the consumer. It was an expression of creativity, and studios took time and effort to deliver that. And because of this, each video game delivered a great experience back then. Because in 1985, when the NES released, it came after the video game crash, where Atari was selling too many shovelware titles, as in titles rushed out quickly to the consumer. So each studio had to make sure their games were performing at 100% and were of the highest quality to ensure everyone was enjoying what they delivered. And besides that, uh, leading on to later years past 1985, we saw so many great franchises evolve and come out. For example, 2001, according to IMBD, a site where critics can review video games and movie titles and much more, there were several titles garnering great reviews, over 9 out of 10 for many of them. And this led to many franchises being born, such as, I'm sorry if you can't see the screen correctly, but Halo, Silent Hill 2, Grand Theft Auto 3, and Super Smash Bros. Melee. All great games and the start of new franchises. This is what consumers wanted, and this is what studios have delivered. But not only did they deliver great games, they delivered great policies. For example, back then internet was not as easy to access or use. That means you couldn't update your games if there was an issue. They had to take time and effort to make sure everything was up to date and smooth running, or else people would give them bad reviews. This could lead to the studio losing jobs and people overall. And another thing, I don't know if you guys noticed, but in the past few years, prices relatively stayed kind of the same, around $60. Back then, that would have been a lot more expensive for people, but as the dollar lost value, gaming actually became cheaper by each year. And then we have Valve. It's one of the most famous gaming companies delivering great games like Half-Life 2, Team Fortress 2. And what they did is they open sourced Team Fortress 2 compared to other studios where they might have kept all their secrets hidden, how they made the game. They allowed people to look at their assets and code and make their own games because this is how lenient they were and how they cared so much for the consumer. And we see how gaming was beautiful and taken seriously as a form of expression. But later on, we see that philosophy die down as corporate greed overtook many game studios and companies. In the modern era, gaming companies don't so much care for the art form of games, leading to a decline in quality. Graphics are noticeable in modern games because we're in 2025, so that means gamings from 2000 are going to look a lot worse than games we have today. but we're actually seeing the opposite of that, where even if we have all the tools and get past lots of limitations, it no longer is about what tools are at our disposal, but our creativity. As we see here, this might not be the best quality, but on with Batman with 2015, it was a game released by Rocksteady. But on the right, we have a game released in 2022. And if you guys could see it more clearly, 2015 was regarded as a better art style, more crisp graphics, no longer being about the technology we have, but what creativity is behind the people working on it. And unfortunately, some game companies decided that instead of thinking creatively, we just release the same game every year. EA, one of the most famous companies, used to be for the consumer. They released games called Madden 2001. It was critically acclaimed, and on IMDb, it's even rated as one of the best games of all times. So instead of creating a new title, new ideas, EA decided, let's release the same game for over 25 years. So every year we got a new Madden, and we right now we're entering the 26th Madden. And unfortunately, with a lot of modern games, we've been seeing that they're essentially adapting the same style. Open world, uh, nothing to do in those open worlds, so it's very generic, very bland, setting for ultra realism. And we just don't see the same creativity we saw back then. And the worst part is how anti-consumer video game companies have been getting. That price point I mentioned, how we always stayed stuck at $60, actually rose up. In recent years, it went to 70 when the PS5 and Xbox Series X were introduced. But Nintendo recently has made some of their games on their new console $80. And Nintendo even was under fire because with their new console, people were criticizing it for being overpriced for just a few simple upgrades, leading to people not buying it as much compared to their original Nintendo Switch. And according to CNET news article, a news article that bases all their articles on entertainment, reported that 54% of gaming revenue came from microtransactions. And what those are is they're just simple currencies used to buy cosmetics for games, meaning that instead of taking time and money to make new ideas, new artworks, companies have decided to focus more on the fashion of what people wear in a supposed free-to-play multiplayer game. So now we see that companies care less and less for the consumer and have no respect to the art. However, I think in recent years we've been seeing a bit of hope within the industry with some studios. And one aspect of the gaming industry we've been seeing that has been on the rise is indie games. What indie games are is that they're smaller studios, smaller budget, and smaller teams developing video games. But because of that, they're under a lot more risk with every game they release. With big AAA studios, which are the supposed blockbuster games, they can still release a decent game and get a lot of money out of it. But for these indie games, if they release a bad game, it's essentially the end for them. So they have to put all their time and effort into creating the highest quality ever. And because of this, every most indie games you see are have a distinct style. As I mentioned before, modern gaming was known for being sort of bland, aiming for realism and not much else for a lot of games. But for indie games, each of them has a clear, distinct style that you can instantly tell what game that is. You are never confused about what game that might be because guess what? The team behind them put so much care and effort compared to some of the big dogs in those big multi-billion dollar corporations. And even the best part about indie games is they're much cheaper. One game that was praised critically in 2025 was a game called Hollow Knight Silksong, where it debuted for $20 in an era where games release for $70 nowadays. And the best part about indie games is that we've been seeing on game dev charts that 58% of these games on Steam, a platform where developers can sell games, 58% of the sales came from indie games. So we're seeing some hope with more creative works pushing out for more quality rather than quantity. And we learned that people are actually revolting against the gaming industry. People are appreciating more games that are creative and care and that have respect for themselves. For example, for Game of the Year, which is an awards like the Oscars, many games came from less than well-known franchises. And because of that, people appreciated them more for their risk-taking, their creative style, and what they accomplished compared to the standard major studio game we've been getting a lot. And because of the internet making news seamless, every time there's a single player game that has been praised or critically acclaimed, people always get on that train of like attention and hype. And due to that, people always appreciate a new indie game or a new single player game that supposedly is a generational masterpiece. And people aren't subjective to simply being consumers. If they see a bad game, they simply don't buy it and can easily go back to their old games that they favored a lot more. So we're seeing hope within the industry, within the consumer and studios. So what we learned is that we've experienced what gaming should be in the past. And then we learned about how corporate greed is ruining game quality and making anti-consumer choices. But we also saw some hope within the industry. So for video games, if video games to you are not art, at the very least, art should be respected and delivered of the utmost quality. This is an expectation we should have for every developer and corporation that delivers these supposed art pieces to us. And we should never settle for the bare minimum. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions?
I have a question.
Yes, Kurt?
Um, so how do you think that the corporate greed grew to such a level that it is now in relation to how cheap an indie developer is able to make their game?
In terms of the corporate greed that has really, can you repeat the question so I can like make sure I answer it correctly?
How do you think that the corporate greed grew to the amount that it is today in relation, like an $80 game made by a corporation versus how a small indie developer with less people and less money is able to make it for $20 and the corporation still gets away with making it 80?
So for the corporation, they have a lot more resources on deck. So because the beauty of gaming back then was they had so many limitations, but nowadays they can just do whatever they want. So a small part of it is trying to cover the cost of the games they release, but at the same time, due to these major studios having such a monopoly, they can essentially set the price to whatever they want. As for indie games, their presence isn't known in the market, but a lot more on the internet within communities and some influencers. And then due to their small teams and less resources, they take a lot more time. Because I don't know if you know this, Cuphead was a game that took, I think, almost 5 years. I think, oh no, 7 years to release, with the developers even taking a second mortgage on their own house. So they definitely had a lot less resources, but because of that, they had a lot more care put into each game to make sure it's delivered to the utmost, the best experience possible. As for why they're so cheap, I'm not exactly sure because they can easily sell it for full price. But because of their low prices, indie games have garnered a reputation of being for the player, for the consumer. Anyone
Thank you.
else?
That answered my question.
Any other questions? Yes, Elijah?
So you mentioned talking about indie games and big corporation games and how indie games have like more heart, I guess, than the big companies like Nintendo right now. How is it that small indie games like I don't know, like Dispatch or Silksong, capture players' hearts more than some of Nintendo's bigger releases like Mario Kart nowadays? And what does that say about the gaming industry and where it's headed?
I believe for indie games, there's no clear expectations for them. They can come in anytime they want with whatever ideas they want. And if it's something that people appreciate and respect, and it sticks, people will just garner a lot of attention to it at that moment. As for major companies, they're under a lot more scrutiny in comparison because they've had such a long reputation. Because Nintendo actually garnered such a positive reputation in the past from like the 90s, 2000s, 2010s, that nowadays they're under such heavy fire with some of their games. As people noticed, they're lacking features. It's just not as fun anymore. And for consoles such as the Nintendo Switch 2, there hasn't been as many games yet, and we haven't seen the birth of many new franchises that captures our hearts, the same as Mario, Metroid, Zelda.
I like
Oh,
that answer.
sorry.
Thank you.
Wait, what? Oh, wait, I forgot to answer the last part. As for where the gaming industry is heading, believe I think people are definitely criticizing companies a lot more harshly. So we may see an uprise of companies finally using pro-consumer practices and giving the people what they want. Thank you.
Woo! Woo!
Thank you.